What does the representation and reaction to the death of the Queen mean for Australia's identity?
Simon.
Say that again, so I understand.
What does the representation of and reaction to the death of the Queen mean for Australia's identity?
Well, I think it very much goes into the matter we were just discussing, in that Australian identity, I think, ought to be grounded very much, as Teela was saying, in something which is unambiguously our own. We are a wonderfully diverse nation. There's huge strength in that, but there's only one thing that actually is capable of uniting us, particularly in a world, a geopolitical environment where people would seek to split us as a divide and conquer. And that one thing is the country and the only people...
The land itself.
The land itself, the land and our relationship to it. And in my view, there's only one group of people, those who have had stewardship of that land for those many tens of thousands of years, who can provide us with a model about how to relate to it in an authentic way. And it just deeply saddens me that we have turned our back for over 200 years on the generous offer that was there to be welcomed if only we'd asked. But we never asked.
It's interesting, Jodie. I think you really sort of came to this idea of our national identity while doing a very Australian thing, watching the football on the weekend. How did that experience affect you?
Yeah, I was watching the AFL last Friday, and for those who saw it, it started with a welcome to country, followed by a minute's silence for the Queen, followed by a rendition of God Save the King, and directly followed by the national anthem. And my jaw kind of dropped because the Crown represents the colonisation of the very country that we were being welcomed to, and it just was, so confronting for me.
Yeah. Can I just say something a bit more about this? And I mentioned at the beginning the need to separate a couple of things which I think have been confused. There's the life of the woman Elizabeth Windsor and who she was and how she related to individuals. And there is the separate life of the British Crown or the Australian Crown, which is something that exists in perpetuity, which never dies, which transfers. And I'm very respectful of the way that people might want to grieve for the woman, the mother, the person who gave so selflessly for so long. But I also think that we have to respect, and Sisonke mentioned this, the absolutely visceral grief for people who have been mistreated by the Crown, that institution. And if you say that people should be allowed to grieve for the one, you must allow grief for the other. And I think that's where, for us, I think we have to ask some questions, as you were saying, about the symbolism of those things coming together in a way. Are we able to separate those two things and have a mature conversation about who we want to be as a people and the institutional arrangements that we want to make? And going back to the earlier discussion, Eric's right that perhaps at the moment there is a majority of people who do vote for the monarchy, for stability. The truth of it is, I think most Australians probably do want to be a republic. If only we could agree about what kind of republic it is.
Hold that thought, because we are going to come to that.
Yeah, I think it feels like there is an incredible opportunity to think creatively and imaginatively and together about what it might look like to take our cue from those who have the moral authority in this country. If there is a people who have a moral authority that is granted by history, it is Indigenous people. And so imagine looking to Uluru rather than to London to take our cue.
Eric, how would you feel if you were an Aboriginal person, an Indigenous person at this moment?
I would adopt the words of Neville Bonner, the first Indigenous Australian to sit in the Australian Parliament. I would adopt the view of other Indigenous people, and with respect to the panel, as I said before, there are very strong constitutional monarchists in our Indigenous community who do not share the views expressed by elements of the panel this evening, and to suggest that our Indigenous community are cookie-cutter replicas of each other with all having a similar view is to do them a disservice and to misrepresent them. It's like the rest of the community, there are differing views, and to say the colonisation and some of, or many of the, or well, all of the issues relating to Australia being a colony should be laid at the feet of the Crown rather than individuals who perpetrated some of the ugly scenes within Australian history. Keep in mind that King George III did not seek to invade Australia, but he sought to settle it, and in fact, in the letters patent to Governor Arthur Phillip, said that he should seek to get the friendship of the, as they were called then, the natives, and to live in amity or friendship with them. Hardly the behaviour of somebody seeking to invade. And so were there skirmishes? Were there massacres? Yes. Were they perpetrated by the Crown? No. They were perpetrated by individuals who disregarded the letters patent provided by King George III.
Come on,
and
Eric.
so there needs to be a full understanding of our history and the actual detail, and you can't get around the letters patent. Now, if people misbehaved, so be it, and they should be brought to account, but to lay all the blame at the Crown is just flies in the face of the objective documented history.
Well, I think, what we've seen here is colonisers will always cherry pick a black voice that suits their agenda. And
that is very disrespectful to Neville Bonner. That is very.
The reality,
we'll just
Eric,
hear from Teela right now.
finish. The reality is, of course, there is a diversity of First Nations voices, and that's what this country actually often forgets. And if we're going to talk about the truth of our history, well, let's go back to how there has never been consent for this colony here. The British Admiral sent Cook down here. He claimed he was ordered to seek the consent of the natives. That was not done. The legitimacy of Australia really rests on the sovereignty of First Nations peoples. As a consequence of now, monarch who was clearly well loved as a person, but as a result of that, I think the frustration is this, that it's not lost on us how many times the Queen met with First Nations. There were many demands in relation to resolving our nation's unfinished business. We're now left with still not really a resolution about that. And I think consequences flow from the fact that there still has not been consent here on this soil. And that means, when it comes to truth-telling, reparations, compensation, and not only that, that these things aren't divisive at all. Bringing the country along on these quite difficult conversations, when it comes to truth-telling, these are going to be really difficult conversations, and I think we need to be prepared to look at both sides of that story and bring that narrative together. Because when we have those yarns, I think we're able to be much better off.
Yeah, look, I just want to, Eric, we all know that if Arthur Phillip had been told to go away by the people who were there, he would not have gone away. Whatever else is said in the letters patent, that's the simple truth of it. And we also know that you can't have it both ways around the monarchy. The monarchy is, as an institution, I'm not talking about the individuals like George or Elizabeth or Charles, I'm talking about the institution. We ascribe to it ultimate responsibility as the monarch. That is what it means to be the monarch. And you can't say, oh, well, they're responsible for all the good bits that were done and not all the bad bits. And that's not about denouncing or being disrespectful to particular individuals. It's just about, at last, hopefully, speaking the truth about what happened. And that was that Europeans turned up, they called it settlement, but basically they were here to stay and they weren't going to go away if they were asked to leave.
So, Sisonke, is it possible, Simon had made this point earlier, that you can separate the individual and the institution? Can you do that? Or does the Queen, or did the Queen, and now King Charles, represent that institution and all of it, the legacy of that history?
Yeah, I think they represent the institution and the legacy of it. I think there are questions to be asked, and I'm in no way a monarchist, obviously, and so I haven't followed, I didn't follow Elizabeth's reign closely enough to know whether there were things she might have done differently, even within the role as a sovereign of the UK. So I do think there are some questions to be asked about whether she might have done a better, more reformist job within the constraints of what she was allowed to do. Those are questions I can't answer, but certainly in terms of your question, I think they are distinct. They are distinct things, and there's an institution, and it represents something awful and terrible, and the pattern is the same all over the world. So what we know happened in Australia is precisely what happened in South Africa.
The United States and genocide of Native Americans as well, Ruth.
Yeah, and you know, we're living in this period where there's a concerted effort to shut down the teaching in the states. There's a huge push by Republicans, it's going state by state right now, to shut down the teaching of racism, to not talk about slavery, institutionalized racism today. You can be fired in public schools in Republican states if you speak about this, or have diversity training in your workplace. In Florida, they're trying to shut down all of these discussions. And this is going on in right-wing countries all around the world. And so this is a moment of reckoning. And it's really important to have these conversations, and they are difficult. You know, in Chile, they just tried to have a new constitution, and they consulted with indigenous people, and they decided to call the identity of Chile plurinational, to include indigenous people. It was not. It did not pass. The voters rejected it. So they're going to go back to the drawing board. But this was an occasion also to reckon with a more expanded sense of identity. So this is important. We're at an important juncture in the world.